Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. This will be the final boarding call, and I cordially invite you to claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what we witnessed last night represents a monumental breaking point in American history. It shows that the American people, irrespective of the fact that President Barack Hussein Obama's failed policies have been trampling the economy, trampling the hopes and aspirations of the people, we have survived it, and we will survive it. But it does go to show that there's something with respect to what Obama does that has just been with him ever since he first assumed the reins of power back in January of 2009. This marks the 8th year of the Obama regime, and one of the least constitutional regimes that this country has seen in living memory. Now, I'm not going to go out and say that Obama is the absolute worst president that the United States of America has ever had, because that's just simply not the case. Nevertheless, he is not a good president. He is not a president that uplived to the actual auspices of the Constitution. And as Jeremy and I have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, the most important thing that would get this country back onto the path of being a vibrant, resurgent, resplendent country again would be to return to strict adherence to the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution, and also just to return to strict adherence to the Constitution itself. You see, whenever we divorce ourselves from the United States Constitution and the edicts that are contained within its four corners, we drive ourselves into a type of moral decay, spiritual decay, and national decay. And everywhere you turn right now, that's exactly what we see in this country. Well, despite this, Obama rushed out in front of the joint session of Congress in order to deliver a different type of State of the Union address than what is traditional. And he was just very, very haughtily proud of himself for doing that. And when you stop and think about it, the State of the the State of the Union address is meant to communicate the state of the country as it is right now, and planned policy suggestions to address the problems that are facing the country and to expand upon the things that are working in the country. That is why Article 2, Section 3 states that the President from time to time shall deliver a message to Congress stating his suggestions. But you see, there is the different part, because with respect to Obama, every State of the Union address he's given in his 8 years in office has always been about what he would do, not just suggestions. They were always filled with veiled threats, and he intended to act upon those threats come hell or high water. And, within his first term of office, that really was able to go forward because the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency. And that is why we got such disastrous things as the so-called Affordable Care Act, or as it is colloquially known, Obamacare, shoved through. That is how we saw the disruption of the country really begin, and Obama was just absolutely committed to it, and was not going to back away from it. But before I actually go in and analyze what was said in this speech, I want to take a moment to reflect upon what the country requires with the State of the Union. You know, going back to the father of the country, George Washington, our first president, when he delivered his State of the Union address, it was in writing. He didn't actually attend a joint session of Congress to speak in front of Congress, because he felt that that would bring undue attention to the office of President of the United States. And when you consider Washington's frame of mind, and indeed the entire frame of mind of the founding generation, that absolutely makes sense, because deep down they were absolutely distrustful of a centralized authority. After all, the long, drawn-out, bloody American War of Independence was against the centralized authority of the British Crown. And the Founding Fathers really did not trust a centralized authority. And we see that with the way that they went through the Articles of Confederation, which proved to not be centralized enough, and then they hit the proper balance with the Constitution of the United States, the supreme law of the land, the longest contiguous running constitutional document in the entire history of humanity. And folks, there really is something special about that. And that is where the doctrine of American exceptionalism comes from. Because when you look at our Constitution and the short, relatively speaking anyway, but illustrious history of the United States, you see that that document formed the foundation of the most stable, the most open, the most free, and the most honest government in all of the world. And yet, we see that over the years, the country has progressively divorced itself from that great document, and when we start down that path and that journey, the United States of America begins to suffer, and the people begin to suffer, and we see the moral decay, the national decay, the economic decay. All of our rights begin to decay, and it's important to remember that with our fundamental and unalienable rights that were endowed to us by our Creator, are couched certain duties and obligations that each and every one of us are called upon to fulfill. Otherwise, the fundamental and unalienable rights are meaningless. And if we do not enact upon our sacred duty to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and unalienable rights, then we are sure to lose them, because there are those nefarious potentates like Barack Hussein Obama, who delivered his State of the Union address last night, the final one, who would do anything and everything to deprive us of said fundamental and unalienable rights. It is a driving force with him. It is what makes him wake up in the morning and push through until he goes to bed to repeat the cycle over and over again. And we have seen it throughout all 8 years of his presidency. But when you look at Washington delivering the written State of the Union address, the humility that he showed drew such respect that the vast majority of State of the Union addresses that were delivered after his presidency, with the one notable exception being John Adams, were delivered in like fashion. And John Adams just like the next president who gave a speech in person was all for expanding the scope and power of federalism. After all, it was his administration that pushed through the 4 laws that would be known as the Alien and Sedition Acts, that sought to limit the free expression of the citizens, that sought to fundamentally transform the country, because at the time the Federalists were engaged in an undeclared naval war with France, and he was trying to make it to where it was a felony to speak against the government. And that is what brought in Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic Republican Party. And, that's not to be confused with the 2 separate political entities that bear the Republican and the Democrat names today. But we see that he needed to call attention, he being John Adams, onto the office of president because he understood that his position was growing precarious and that the people were not in support of the aims of his Federalist Party. Because at that point, the Federalist Party was mired in corruption. And they didn't like, they being the American people, didn't like what they saw and the way that the country was headed. And the presidential election of 1800 proved to be very contentious. In fact, it received the moniker of the Revolution of 1800. And you see that when Thomas Jefferson delivered his first State of the Union address, he returned to the way that Washington did it, by delivering a written address to Congress to show that there was stability in the fledgling country, and that there wasn't any threat of it tearing itself asunder, or of it plunging into violent revolution. That was important, and it was such a beacon and such a model that no president after Jefferson delivered an in-person speech in front of a joint session of Congress until 1913. And it was under the Fabian socialist Woodrow Wilson that the tradition was rebuked, and every president after Wilson, with the notable exception of Herbert Hoover, delivered an in-person speech before a joint session of Congress. And it was in the preceding presidents who delivered the State of the Union address after Wilson that it started to become a media spectacle. First you had radio, then television, and then it became more and more and more about kabuki theater than actually giving a statement of account as to the actual state of the Union, meaning what is the health of the country at the time. And not just a diagnosis of what the health of the country was at the time, but also the prescribed policy initiatives that would restore the country to where it needed to be, or to continue and expand upon the parts that were working. That is what our founding fathers intended when they included the clear and concise language of Article 2, Section 3. But Obama wanted to move away from that. He wasted no time within the confines of the speech that he delivered last night to make that abundantly clear. Because what he said is, tonight I want to go easy on the traditional list of proposals for the year ahead. Now, he then gave a cursory mention of other policy agenda items that he had, such as teaching students computer code and personalizing medical treatment for patients, all of these things are not really important. They're not what the State of the Union address was meant to do. What they were meant to do is to actually tell the country where it needed to go. But one of the things he said is fixing the broken immigration system, protecting our kids from gun violence. No, Mr. President, if you were actually serious about that, you would abolish all of these gun-free zones that make it so dangerous for our children, that make it so dangerous for anyone and everyone living in the country. If you were serious about that, you would allow more, not less, citizens to keep and bear firearms, and you wouldn't be looking to curtail the fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms by having doctors report patients that they don't believe are mentally sound to keep and bear firearms, or including the no-flight list part that has no due process aspect to it, which is in direct violation of what is required of our fundamental and unalienable rights. I have to once again draw attention to the conclusions that George Mason came to when he was called upon to assist in drafting the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, and then became an integral part in the establishment of the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. He unequivocally and inherently understood that our fundamental and unalienable rights are endowed to us by our Creator, and that no earthly authority, without going through due process under the law, could rightfully deprive, encroach upon, belittle, or abridge the fundamental and unalienable rights of the citizens. And this all rests in the doctrine of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty explains just exactly who is the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic of ours. And that is we the people. Folks, there really is no way around that. And whenever we attempt to move away from that, or to distance ourselves from that, that is when we see the country start to fall into disrepair. That is when we see the vices of tyranny, despotism, and oppression begin to sweep across the land with near irresistible force. And that is exactly what President Obama has been doing for the 8 years of his 2 terms in office. But he then talked about paid leave and raising the minimum wage. Again, things that the government should not be doing if we are to return to the actual notion of popular sovereignty. And then he says he wanted to focus on the future. He mentioned that the country is in a time of extraordinary change. There's reshaping the way we live and work. And then he mentioned that hoax of man-made global warming, and he couches all of his language in this very vague, obtuse, and abstract sort of alliteration, which draws me back to a warning that Professor Zygmunt Dobbs gave with respect to John Maynard Keynes, the Fabian Society, and Keynesian economics. You see, all of it is couched in this type of grandiose language that is designed to obfuscate the truth and hide it from general, hardworking American citizens. And the reason that it is done in such a fashion is they understand inherently that the American citizen simply cannot take time away from the actions that are necessary for sustaining themselves and surviving. And the reason for that is because government has simply made it impossible for the American citizen to absolutely make a living while also being totally and completely civically responsible. And that has been by design by these nefarious utopian Fabian socialists who want to work without rest, without pause, without respite towards pushing the country towards a socialist future. That is the type of quote-unquote rosy future that Obama was speaking of in this entire State of the Union address. And it has nothing to do with the constitutional requirements that a president from time to time give a message to Congress explaining what the country is going through and to provide suggestions that Congress may or may not abide by. Folks, look at what he's trying to do with our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. And the way that he is giving executive amnesty to waves of illegal aliens that have flooded into this country, and the way that he also wants to flood the country with supposed and so-called Syrian refugees, while at the same time depriving us of our ability to defend ourselves when we've already had so-called refugees attack us in the past. The Chechnyan Mario brothers Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev come to mind. And the reason that I mention all of this is because he's being disingenuous, he's seeking to weaken the country, and he's not addressing the State of the Union, he's addressing a state of delusion. And let's not kid ourselves, folks. He has been delusional. No sane, rational thinking person would have ever called the Islamic State or ISIS the junior varsity team. Nobody with a sane and right mind would refer to that organization as ISIL, because that mentions a fictitious place known as the Levant. And that's actually giving them some sort of intellectual credibility. It is legitimizing their claim by even calling them that. And folks, semantics matter. Semantics absolutely matter. Because that is what can inspire movements to be empowered in ways previously unimagined. And that is exactly what we're seeing with ISIS. But the president says that we need to have education for girls in the most remote villages. Well, yes, we do have that, and yes, technology does provide that, but it also, as he mentions, connects terrorists. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that you allow the people to exercise their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. That way they can help prevent a vast majority of these lone wolf, ISIS-inspired attacks that we have seen. And you want to see the real proof of that is that brave police officer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, isn't it interesting that all throughout this speech, Obama doesn't mention that. Obama doesn't mention how his divisive stand and stance on race issues in this country has plunged race relations back to a 40-year low. He has single-handedly erased most of the progress that was made during the civil rights movement. And yet he points the finger at we, the people. We, the decent, hard-working people that form the spine and backbone of this country, and lays the blame at our feet. What an intellectually disingenuous, sniveling little weasel he was being. And he says that we need to forget about the past. He said, in fact, he said that America has been through big changes before. Wars and depression, the influx of new immigrants, workers fighting for a fair deal, movements to expand civil rights. Each time there have been those who told us to fear the future, who claimed we could slam the brakes on change, who promised to restore past glory if we just got some group or idea that was threatening America under control. Folks, what he's doing there is he's projecting. He is doing the usual Fabian doublespeak that was made very, very famous and possible by John Maynard Keynes. And what that comes down to is that he's actually projecting as a form of deflection. Those of us who want to preserve the tenets of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and unalienable rights, we are not dwelling in the past. You see, it's that straw man that's always there that they want to say that it's antiquated, outdated, outmoded. But folks, if you remember, the tenets that underpin our shared Constitution and thereby the representative Republican form of government that it creates are timeless because they are natural law. They are absolutely timeless. They are just as applicable today as they were 200 years ago, as they will be 200 years from now. But what Obama was showing here was that he clearly and unequivocally does not believe in that. He does not believe in it at all. He believes that the government should be the ultimate arbiter of sovereignty, when that is the exact and polar opposite of the foundational vision that our founding fathers had for this country. But he doesn't care. That doesn't matter to him. The only thing that matters to him is his radical, twisted, extremist, left-wing ideology and agenda. And he will double down on that irrespective of the potential harm that it will have on the nation and her people. And to reiterate this, he quotes Lincoln, who, as we pointed out on our Constitutional Special Edition that talked about the way that Lincoln violated the Constitution, was not someone who was working for the best interests of the country. And he said, "We did not, in the words of Lincoln, adhere to the dogmas of the quiet past. Instead, we thought anew and acted anew." Now, folks, remember, the type of Keynesian doublespeak that we're seeing here, which is actually just a front for Fabian socialism, is exactly what is being carried out in this speech. He is saying that we need a new type of system, a new way of looking. That goes back to his idea back in the 2008 campaign trail to fundamentally transform the United States of America. What does that all come down to? It comes down to a fundamental aspect that he doesn't like the United States of America. He doesn't like what this nation represents. He doesn't believe that sovereignty, true sovereignty, ultimate sovereignty, rests in the hands of we the people. Yet that has been the way this country has been since its inception over 2 centuries ago. But in his mind, that's outdated, that's antiquated, it's outmoded. It has no place in a modern society. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. If we want to see our country restored, if we want to see a bright future in this country, it will certainly not be under the guise of some Fabian socialist rubbish. It won't be by embracing the doctrines of Keynesian economics. It will be by embracing the individual sovereignty, the popular sovereignty of the people, and returning to strict adherence to the United States Constitution. And that requires an open, free market, something that Keynesian economics is diametrically opposed to. But as we see with Obama, He wants to go back to the mixed economy system that was proposed first by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto of 1847. And so he says that it's a good thing that we've had so much change. He said in pertinent part, in fact, it's that spirit that made the progress of these past 7 years possible. It's how we recovered from the worst economic crisis in generations, even though we really haven't. It's how we reformed our healthcare system, even though he's actually just made it worse, and reinvented our energy sector. He's only made it worse. How we delivered more care and benefits to our troops and veterans. Really? Has he forgotten the VA scandal that surrounded his regime? That has never been resolved. It's still a glaring problem, so he hasn't brought more care and benefits to our troops, and he's even sent pink slips to the brave servicemen who were fighting on the ground while they were in the midst of combat. That, again, the president is engaged in duplicity of the worst sort, and in true Keynesian Fabian socialist style, he thinks that he can just pull the wool over our eyes. But he can't. Because the truth is absolute, the truth has no agenda, and the truth shines through each and every time. And the truth is, he hasn't done any of this. He said, we secured our freedom in every state to marry the person we love. No. No. We perverted the moral standards which help protect and provide for the building block of society, which is also the same thing that Karl Marx advocated and what the Fabian socialists advocate and what John Maynard Keynes advocated. Zygmunt Dobbs' piece, Keynes at Harvard, clearly explains in beautiful detail, and is absolutely well researched. It shows how Harvard was used as a linchpin and a launching pad for social subversion and constitutional subversion. And folks, let's not forget where President Obama received his legal training. It was at Harvard Law School. And therefore, he has been exposed to that sort of twisted machinations that we saw from the Fabians that used Keynesian economics as a cover to advance their agenda to fundamentally transform this country. And it is an intellectually disingenuous initiative that they have set this country towards, and it has only hurt us. He then goes on to say, but such progress is not inevitable. It's the result of choices we make together. On that, he's right. We here in the United States of America can either choose to abandon the natural law principles that are timeless, that will continue to guide this country to a bright future, that has an irrefutable track record of success, or we can embrace Marxism, Fabian socialism with a Keynesian veneer, which has no place in the future and has failed in each and every instance that it has been attempted. But you see, folks, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the mainstream media aren't going to cover this. They were the ones sitting there thinking it was so marvelous that he was revamping what they called a tired and trite State of the Union address. But you see, folks, what that hides is the ugly truth of their agenda. Their radical and twisted agenda is to completely transform the country into a way that it was never meant to be transformed, to push the people into despair, and that is why the American people are feeling the way that they do right now. It is why people are unsure of the future. It is why Obama is now out there trying to say, look, I know my policies haven't worked very well right now, even though I'm not going to fully admit that. If you read between the lines, it's there for us all to see. But all it means is that we just have to double down on it. Wrong, Mr. President. That is not what it means. That is not how we will restore this country. And let's face it, folks, the country is in need of a renaissance, a rebirth. And it needs to be reborn strictly adhering to the natural law principles that propelled the country to such lofty heights in such a short yet illustrious history, comparatively speaking, to the other nations in the world. Yet Obama wants to make us like every other nation on earth. That is why he says that there is nothing exceptional about the United States of America, that there was nothing exceptional about the conception and construction and the natural law tenets of the United States of America. Folks, that is what we have seen for 8 years. That is what we saw condensed into a speech that was what? Just a little over an hour, or right at an hour. And he says that we need to work together. Well, Mr. President, the only one that you have to blame for there being as strong of a partisan divide as there is in this country right here, right now, is to look in the mirror at you and your own party's reflection. You are the one that pushed the divisive so-called Affordable Care Act, or as it is colloquially known, Obamacare, through, not allowing there to be debate, not allowing there to be a discussion, everything being done behind closed doors, like you did once again with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and all of those other nefarious so-called free trade deals, which would be ceding up sovereignty of the United States to some global initiative. That's not good for the country, and it's certainly not what the American people want. And then you shut America's representatives out of it unless they sign a confidentiality agreement, when there is nothing in that agreement, at least from the words of those who have seen it, that would require it to be classified or top secret. But no, he wants to double down on his delusional view of a fictitious future that really, truly, and ultimately has no place in this country. And what's so tragic about that is this country is so great because of the exceptional way that it was created, because of the great and naturally inspired, natural law inspired Constitution that we have. But none of that matters to President Obama. The only thing that matters to him is his Fabian socialist agenda. And he will double down on that, as he always tries to. And he will work to dismantle the country, to replace it with this Fabian socialist view that he has of the world. And of course, just like any Fabian socialist, he's trying to work socialism in with incremental steps. And he does that because he thinks that that will finally bring in the day of a socialist workers' utopia. And he has always made that quite clear, that this is his goal. And it doesn't change. And the reason it doesn't change is because they don't have new ideas. Their ideas belong with them and them alone. And they expect us just to sit down, shut up, and enjoy what they're doing to the country. And the reason, again, just falls down to this whole notion of fundamentally transforming the country. Obama didn't make a Freudian slip there when he stated that. He absolutely, wholeheartedly believed in what he was saying. And he absolutely and wholeheartedly wanted that to be the case. Because deep down, within his heart, he loathes and despises everything that the country stands for and represents. And think about it, folks. Think about what Reverend Wright said. And the big brouhaha that was there with his statements back in 2008 of, no, it's not God bless America. It's goddamn America. That is the point of view of the president, and it has not changed. And remember what Mucci said when he was trying to assume office for the first time. She said that for the first time in her life, that she was proud of her country. What sort of person says that? Not somebody who loves the country. Not somebody who wants to see the country do well. And it's as I've said on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, that when you engage in that sort of speech, and when you say that sort of thing, it clearly demonstrates that you do not love the country. Rather, you are acting in such a way as to attempt to tear the country apart because your radical, twisted agenda is diametrically opposed to what is good for the country. And you see that he wants to tear down the country in his statements. He says, first, how do we give everyone a fair shot at an opportunity and security in this new economy? Fair. What does that mean? Well, that's another Keynesian type of slip. That's to say, it needs to be in the Fabian socialist model of from those who produce to those who supposedly need. And then there's also the type of hatred of technology that the Fabians had. They literally were a type of Luddite. He said, second, how do we make technology work for us and not against us, especially when it comes to solving urgent challenges like climate change? Mr. President, climate change is a hoax. It is just designed to push for Fabian socialism. But you know that. So just be honest about what it is that you're pushing for. Don't try and make it this thing where you're, oh, I'm out to save the people and to save the planet. You're not out to save the planet, President Obama. You're just out to spread the tentacles of socialism, to further ensnare the United States of America, to further push the people into absolute and permanent dependence upon the federal government. That has been your goal since day one, and you have doubled down on that, irrespective of the detrimental impact that it will have on the country and our representative Republican form of government. And then he says, how can we keep America safe and lead the world without becoming its policeman? Well, that's simple, Mr. President. We go back to adhering to American interests and stop this notion of leading from your behind, because that has made asses of the entire country. You have made us a laughingstock on the geopolitical sphere, and the only one you have to blame for that is yourself. But you don't care. You want to see America's power and influence and impact diminish, because in your mind it is a wicked thing. In your mind, America is a force of darkness. Why else would you come out and try and grab our firearms in the wake of an Islamo-fascist terrorist attack? In fact, the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil since the dark days of 9/11-01. If you didn't believe that America was somehow at fault or deserved it. That's the way you Fabian socialists are. Yet you try and hide it, as Zygmunt Dobbs told us, by putting on a veneer of good manners, of trying to be accepted in polite society. And yet you really are what the Fabian symbol is, a wolf in sheep's clothing. You are out to strip this country of everything that makes it great, meaningful, powerful, and a force for good. You can't even see into your own black heart to realize that that is working against the American people, that the American people do not support your so-called policy agendas, which is nothing more than thinly veiled Fabian socialist policies that have been with us since the mid to late 19th century. But then you have the gall to go out and say that anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction. Really? Really, Mr. President? Let's talk about how all of the unemployment numbers keep getting reworked. All of this data keeps getting reworked because you're cooking the books. It's just like the ClimateGate scandals, where all of these so-called scientists are cooking the books, pardon the pun, to fudge the numbers to create a general warming trend. When in fact, when you look at the more accurate satellite records of temperature, it shows that there has been no marked change in temperature, no marked warming trend since 1998. Mr. President, it is time to stop the intellectually disingenuous platitudes that you have been shoving in our face time and time again for a period of 8 years. We're tired of it. The country is fed up with it. But then you lie about 900,000 new jobs. How can that be when, in fact, active engagement in the employment sector is at a 40-year low? The numbers don't add up. You're selling us Mickey Mouse math, and we don't believe it. And you know why? It's because what you're saying is not the truth, and the truth always has a way of shining through the veneer of lies, deceit, and dishonesty. But that has been your credo, hasn't it, Mr. President? Folks, think back. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. That was a lie. It was a lie that everyone's premiums would go down. They haven't. And he lies again, saying that the health care premiums have stalled. They're not going up anymore. Wrong. And then his true Fabian socialist Keynesian colors come out for everyone to see when he said that companies have less loyalty to their communities and more wealth and income is concentrated at the very top. Well, let's break that down. Why? would these companies have less loyalty to their communities? Oh, it's because of the community-type agitating that he did, the so-called collective bargaining that unions engage in, which drive up the costs so that the companies have no choice. The reason that they have that is that the United States of America has the highest corporate tax rate of any nation in the free world. But he doesn't admit that because it goes against his propagandistic message. And he's marching, quite frankly, goose-stepping in line with Joseph Goering's tenets of propaganda. That aspect of his character has not changed. And he will just double down on anything in which he believes that he can push his radical, twisted, left-wing extremist ideology and agenda down the throats of the American people. And he's giddy about that. Because he thinks it's a good thing to tear the country apart. Because he is diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution. And he doesn't believe that we are endowed by our Creator with fundamental and unalienable rights. Instead, he tries to state that we should provide 2 years of community college at no cost for every responsible student. Why? Why is it a bad thing for a student to know how to work towards a goal, or to reward students who had families that planned for this? Why does he not realize that by providing free so-called community college, or at least 2 years of it, a free associate's degree, he's going to completely destroy the value of an already undervalued degree? Oh, it's because that's what he wants to do. And again, he follows this up by saying a great education isn't all we need in this new economy. You see, folks, you have to look for the key words, the weasel words that are employed by these Fabian socialists at any and every given opportunity. New, a new economy. Socialism is not new. And it is certainly, unlike our natural law tenets, not something that I would call timeless. The only thing about it that is undeniable is that everywhere that it has been practiced, everywhere that they have attempted to implement it, it has failed. And failed miserably. But the president doesn't care. He's going to keep fighting, double down, pushing through. And that's exactly what he wants. And then he says that we need to strengthen Medicare and Social Security. But he's the one that has been robbing from them to pay for his policy initiatives. And let us not forget that the American people were forced into those systems, that it denies the popular sovereignty of the people. It denies them the ability to make decisions for themselves, to make investments for themselves, and forces them to be bound and kept down by the heavy hand of an oppressive and tyrannical government. That is diametrically opposed to everything that our founding fathers stood for. But again, you're not going to hear this from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. You're not going to hear this from the so-called educated elite in the ivory towers of academia throughout the United States. Because they proactively support this. Because they have bought into this virus of Fabianism, which was injected into our schools through the School of Economics at Harvard and that disastrous economic school of thought known as Keynesian economics. Folks, we have seen for at least the past half century that the presidents who avowed themselves and followed the left-wing ideology and Fabian socialist doctrines have weakened this country. And we also see that the so-called Affordable Care Act is just yet another vast expansion of this web of Fabian socialist programs that are strangling the lifeblood out of this country. And that is the goal. It's just like the Cloward-Priven formula. They want to overwhelm the country. They want to push the country back into this Stone Age mentality. And Zygmunt Dobbs was absolutely right that we need to be vigilant and aware of this sort of thing because it is there in the country right now. It is all around us, and they are not letting up. Folks, this is not going to go away. We are going to have to be proactive. Then he sits there and says, sarcastically, now I'm guessing we won't agree on health care anytime soon. Well, no duh, Mr. President, because you attempted to force this unconstitutional bill on us. You attempted to work your Fabian socialist experiment on us without any input from us. That is dictatorial. That is imperial. That has no place in a free, open, honest, representative Republican society like that of the United States. He then says, say a hard-working American loses his job, we shouldn't just make sure that he can get unemployment insurance. We should make sure that program encourages him to retain or retrain for a business that's ready to hire him. Sounds a bit like Stalinist-era re-education camps. Folks, this type of language that we're seeing espoused by the President of the United States of America is nothing new. It is a restatement of the failed policies of utopian socialist cabals that existed in the past, failed in the past, worked against everything of the individual in the past, and denied the humanity of the people wherever it took root. That is the last thing that we should be embracing in the United States of America. But once again, you won't hear that from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And then again, he said, that's the way we make the new economy work better for everybody. Mr. President, that's not a new economy. It is the tried and failed tactics of a dark, twisted, and maniacal past. The maniacal past of Fabian socialism, red communism, and all of those radical extremist fringes of the left. That includes fascism and National Socialism. But revisionist historians will go out of their way to try and ensure that the up-and-coming generations don't know that the up-and-coming generations aren't even going to know exactly who they are or what their national identity is. This has all been in the works for well over half a century. But folks, unlike what President Obama tries to say here, that we can't look back to the glory of the past, he's the one that's looking to push the failed policies of the past. I'm the one that's saying, if we really want to save the country, we must embrace the Constitution. It's common sense. That's all it is. But this president is diametrically opposed to common sense. This president is working tirelessly to push this country more stalwartly into the corner of socialism, because that's what he believes. And look how far we have been pushed. when
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders can actually try and run for the office, the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States, as a democratic, socialist, communist, fascist.
it shows just how far to the left they have pushed this country. They have normalized this sort of behavior which would have never been tolerated in generations past. And no, I'm not just saying that we should marginalize one particular group. But it would be absolute foolishness to allow a group whose avowed purpose is to destroy our way of life, our national character, heritage, spirit, and identity, to move forward with attempting to grasp the reins of power in this country unchecked, unfettered. We can't ignore it, but that's exactly what he wants us to do. And he is ready to take up force upon us. Remember when he said that he wanted his followers and adherents to get up in the face of those who disagree with them, to attempt to engage in this war of words and a war of intimidation simply because somebody doesn't agree with his policies? Does that sound like what a rational person would say or do? Does that sound like what a truly liberty-loving person would advocate? Folks, I think the answer is quite clear. That has no place in a free, open, and honest society. Particularly in one in which our entire system of government, our representative Republican form of government, is created by a constitution which is based upon the natural law tenets that are timeless. And that's why these Fabian socialists, these advocates of Keynesian economics, always attempt to destroy the moral norms in a culture. They wish to eradicate the social mores so that they can replace them with their twisted, demented, delusional, and destructive tenets of socialism. It must be a very dark and cold heart that thinks that this is a good idea for the future of the country. And then the president had to go on and plunge himself into full intellectual disingenuousness. He said, "I believe a thriving private sector is the lifeblood of our economy." If you believe that, then why are you trying to force everybody to comply with Obamacare? Why are you trying to put these draconian, overzealous regulations on our energy industry? Why are you attacking the very lifeblood of this country, the small business? Mr. President, the old adage, actions speak louder than words, rings true. And we are absolutely seeing that in the United States of America right now, because your actions have spoken far louder than your hollow, empty, and meaningless words. You don't believe in the private sector. I recall the words you uttered on your re-election trail in 2012. You turned to a small businessman and said, "You didn't create your business. Somebody else did that. The janitor did that." Mr. President, do you think that we are so stupid that we cannot recall the duplicitous things and intellectually disingenuous things that you have said in the past? Please stop trying to insult our intelligence. It should be beneath even someone of your caliber. But apparently, it is not. You say that the businesses are just out for record corporate profits. And then you focus on working families. You always focus on dividing the country. You are attempting to inject the poison pill of balkanization into the country so that once again it is easier to divide and conquer the people of the United States. Mr. President, we are on to your agenda. We are on to your twisted and nefarious goals. And we reject them. We reject them because we already know that what makes this country good, decent, strong, proactive, and free is our ability to think for ourselves, our ability to act for ourselves, the tenets of self-respect, self-accountability, and self-determination. But at each and every corner, there you are, Mr. President, standing in direct opposition to the will, hope, and aspiration of the American people. You are not preaching a future for the American people. You are preaching a Fabian socialist future where you have illicitly amassed power for yourself at the expense of the true and ultimate wielders of sovereignty, we the people. And this speech of yours is nothing short of a bad joke. Except nobody's laughing, Mr. President. Nobody. And again, he mentions the new economy. Workers and startups and small businesses need more of a voice, not less. Then why have you been doing everything in your power to strip that voice from them? You see, folks, he is so disingenuous. He then goes on to say that he's protected an open internet. Really? Really? As I recall, it was your administration that put it into government control via the FCC, as if it was over the radio airwaves. Well, folks, we here at the Wright Flyer fly you over the friendly airwaves to empower you, to provide you with the truth. Don't take my words on this for granted. Don't take it at face value. Go and look into this yourself and see what it is that I'm telling you. I am wanting you to become freed from the morass and the malarkey that has been thrust upon us by the establishment wings of both the gutless opposition party and the Democratic Nazi Committee. And here's the thing. We have to be proactive in protecting our country. And not just our country, but our fundamental and unalienable rights. We have to be the ones that realize that our fundamental and unalienable rights can easily be quashed if we don't know what they are, and if we are deprived of the ultimate fundamental and unalienable right, which is best utilized to defend all other fundamental and unalienable rights, the right to keep and bear firearms. And despite all of the empty, meaningless platitudes that President Obama thrust out during this State of Delusion address, he made sure, sitting next to the Squatch, Moochie Obama, was an empty chair, supposedly to symbolize the victims of gun violence. Mr. President, you lampooned Clint Eastwood back in 2012 for using an empty chair as a plot device, as a prop. And yet, in 2016, you turn to the same prop for yourself. The problem is the joke's on you. Because we know, we see through your attempts. We see through your lies and deception. You're not the most transparent presidential so-called administration that this country has ever seen, you are one of the most opaque. You don't care about the victims of gun violence. If you did, you would eliminate the real danger, which is twofold. First are these so-called gun-free zones that just send up a red flag, like waving a red flag in front of the face of an enraged bull, so that all of the social deviants and Fabian socialists that just want to end it can come out and kill as many as they can before they go with them. Then, you want to strip and deprive decent, law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, while flooding this country with those who have a proven track record of engaging in terrorist acts, of being infiltrated by the very group you call the junior varsity team, which is growing at an alarming rate, faster than Al-Qaeda ever deemed possible. And then you expect us to buy all of the nonsense that you've been peddling. But the idea and the notion of caveat emptor, or buyer beware, comes to mind. And I think that the American people are very wary of what it is that you are attempting to sell them, what it is that you are trying to deceive them with. We are on to you, Mr. President, and we are tired of your lies, your twisted machinations, your attempts to tear our representative Republican government apart from the seams. But it doesn't matter to him, folks. It never has, it never will. He thinks that what he's doing is useful, but it's not. And it all comes down to his distaste, his contempt for the United States of America and for her people. That aspect of him is never going to change. And he will never stand up for what makes this great country great. Instead, he sets forth a shining example of his foreign policy of leading from his behind as opening up diplomatic relations with Cuba. A staunchly communist nation that threatened to plunge the world into a nuclear holocaust that is not even a full 100 miles off the coast of America. And a very country right now that got one of our missiles, one of our Hellfire missiles, and will be disseminating that to the other rogue regimes of the world in an attempt to tear down the United States or level the playing field. Maybe this is another harebrained redistributive program dreamed up in the back rooms of the Obama regime. Now that is just mere and idle speculation on my part, but why doesn't he mention that? He mentions lifting the embargo. He mentions his deal with Iran, and isn't that funny? What he doesn't talk about with respect to his foreign policy is that just as he was giving this speech, there were 10 American servicemen, and actually it was 9 men, 1 woman, who are in the hands of the Iranians. He should have demanded their immediate release, but he didn't. Our Secretary of State, the rather grotesque-looking John Kerry, isn't going to do a blessed thing. It's like 1979 all over again, folks. We are in that weak of a position as a nation, and the president is spinning out this meaningless, empty, platitudinal, platitude-filled fluff as if that's something to be proud of, as if that's something that won't be judged harshly by the annals of history. Well, Mr. President, do I have news for you, because history most certainly will judge you harshly for that, because what you have been doing is diametrically opposed to the will, hope, and aspirations of the American people. But it doesn't connect with him. It doesn't connect with him because he loathes and despises the sovereigns. And yet, in duplicitous fashion, he says, "We the people." Our Constitution begins with those three simple words we've come to recognize mean all people. In other words, he was saying that it wasn't natural law to begin with, not just some. Words that insist we rise and fall together. Then, you see what it is, rise and fall together? So he seeks to divide us so that we will fall together, to then replace it with his Fabian socialist regime. Folks, you cannot make this stuff up, and you cannot miss what it is. He says the future we want, all of us want. Oh, so now he's speaking for all of us, apparently. Opportunity and security for our families, a rising standard of living, a sustainable, peaceful planet for our kids, all of that is within our reach. But you notice there's always a but with one of these types of statements, but it will only happen if we work together. In other words, if we just all bow and capitulate to his Fabian socialist dreams, then it will be achievable. What a load of malarkey. What a load of malarkey. It's nonsense. It's bovine excrement. Mr. President, please stop shoveling excrement at us and telling us it's chocolate pudding. Because it's not. And what you're selling us is not worth anything. And then again, remember how I said that he kept mentioning a new economy? Well, then he says we need a new politics, a new political system in this country. It will only happen if we fix our politics. A better politics doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. There it is. The reverse philosophy, the reverse psychology. That's exactly what he means. That's exactly what he means. This is a big country, different regions, different attitudes, different interests. Except you can't have them in the South if you have the Southern Battle Cross. No, you can't have joy in that. You can't have pride if you're a white individual. That's now taboo. He said, our founders distributed power between states and branches of government and expected us to argue, just as they did, fiercely, over the size and shape of government, over commerce and foreign relations, over the meaning of liberty and the imperatives of security. They never once fought over the meaning of liberty. They never once fought over the natural law tenets. They fought over the application of them. And they would stand in solidarity against the type of federal government that you wish to impose on the American people, because that's the very type of centralized authority in the British Crown that they fought that long and bloody American War of Independence against. But you see, folks, this is why they wish to thrust Common Core education down our throats. This is why they want to indoctrinate our children, because it'll make statements like that appear meaningful, intelligent, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. What it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen, is that the president is out attempting to redefine what it means to be an American. That the president is attempting to tell us that he knows what's best. And he speaks of the basic bonds of trust that democracy requires. Mr. President, need I remind you, we are a representative republic. We are not a democracy. But it doesn't matter. He says it doesn't work if we think the people who disagree with us are all motivated by malice. Mr. President, your actions speak louder than your words. You have even come out and thrown out these straw man arguments to bolster your case. And then you try and make it appear as though you are taking the high road when in fact you are not. He said, democracy breaks down when the average person feels their voice doesn't matter, that the system is rigged in favor of the rich or the powerful. Well, scratch that rich or powerful, just is in favor of the regime or some special interest. Again, the regime. Too many Americans feel that way right now. Well, gee, Mr. President, I wonder why. Could it be that our government has been ignoring us? That when we tell them to resist your efforts to, quote-unquote, fundamentally transform this country, or if we didn't want our country to be fundamentally transformed, that it's getting done anyway because you're forcing it through with the heavy hand of tyranny and despotism? Come now, Mr. President. You have only yourself and your despicable minions, both in the Republican gutless opposition party and the Democratic Nazi committee, to blame. You can't lay this one on the people, but you're trying to. And then you, in duplicitous fashion, say that you have no doubt that a president with the gifts of Lincoln or Roosevelt, in other words, what? Presidents both pushing for more centralized government, might have better bridged the divide. Well, FDR didn't. Lincoln sure as hell didn't. He didn't bridge the divide, he divided the country. We fought a major war, killing more Americans than in any of our other wars combined. But they bridged the gap. And he says, I guarantee I'll keep trying to be better so long as I hold this office. But he said it cannot be his task or any president's alone. Then why do you keep trying to take it alone? If Congress says that you cannot do what you are trying to do, then say, okay. The proper auspices of government says it's time to move on. But you don't want to move on. You won't admit that. You believe you know best. That's why you said, I got a pen and I got a phone, and I'm going to use them to subvert the Constitution, and I'm going to ignore Article 6, Clause 2, which states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Folks, there can be no doubt that he really does know the Constitution. That's why he's working so diligently to dismantle it. He is dismantling it from within. He didn't learn it with reverence. He learned it with malicious intent, and he is carrying out his twisted machinations. Then he talks about reducing the influence of money in our politics so that a handful of families or hidden interests can't bankroll our elections. Okay, then how will it be done? And he says, if our existing approach to campaign finance reform can't pass muster in the courts because it was an attempt to violate free speech, we need to work together to find a real solution because it's a problem. And most of you don't like raising money. I know, I've done it. Well, that's all you've done. That's all you've done your second term. You have not been doing your duty, your job, or what you were elected to do. And in some ways, that's a very good thing, because the last thing that the American people need is a more proactive president like you trying to subvert the Constitution at each and every step. He says, changes in political process, or in our political process, and not just who gets elected, but how they get elected. Folks, that is your Fabian socialist Keynesian type doublespeak right there. He was just reiterating everything that he believes is wrong with the country and that needs to be fundamentally transformed. And then he lies. At the very end, he says that the America I know is the country we love, clear-eyed, big-hearted, undaunted by challenge, optimistic that unarmed truth... Now, isn't that interesting? What a poignant choice of words, because he wants to unarm the true sovereigns. Unarmed truth means truth that can then be covered up, killed, destroyed. And unconditional love, meaning love him unconditionally, love his agenda unconditionally, will have the final word. Well, no. He says, I believe in change because I believe in you, the American people. Then leave us alone, Mr. President. Stop trying to fundamentally transform our country. Stop trying to disarm us. Stop trying to deprive us of everything that made this country great. But you're not going to do that. Because you don't believe in the American people. But folks, I will leave you with some food for thought. There is a way to stop the hemorrhaging of our way of life and of our standard of living and of everything that matters in this country. And that way is to once again embrace strict adherence to the United States Constitution, the natural law tenets that underpin it, to gain a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and unalienable rights, to realize that no rightful earthly authority can take those rights away without first giving you due process under the law. Those are the undeniable truths that represent the best and brightest of American values. And that is the way that we would rekindle this country. And with that said, it is time for me to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. And I hope that you join Jeremy and me the next time that we take off over the friendly airwaves, leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment as we always do. And I invite you to leave comments, concerns, either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. Thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you next time. Do take care.